All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Higher Learning, Institutionalizing Social Change. My name is Aaron Dworkin. I'm the former dean and current professor of arts leadership and entrepreneurship at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at the University of Michigan, founder of the Sphinx organization and host of the weekly shows Arts Engines and Artful Science. And I will be serving as facilitator for what I anticipate will be an informing and engaging session on this critically important topic. While we are in the midst of, I think really a societal moment of captivation surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts, that is countered by the ongoing statistical reality that the majority of those who engage in our various disciplines of art making lack the rich texture that comprises the mosaic of what is the diverse American tapestry. While statements of solidarity from predominantly white institutions are flooding our digital pathways, all too often those who comprise our communities of color find the reality of their artistic opportunities and networks remaining static. Despite these contrasts, there are leaders in our field who are not only doing the hard work to bring about transformational solutions today because it's timely, but have been deeply immersed in bringing about impact for years because they understand and are dedicated to the role of social change in this important medium of the arts that provides the fabric which really connects us as a nation. And arguably, this work is most important in our institutions of higher learning, where we are focused on preparing the next generation of arts practitioners and leaders. So today we will have the opportunity to learn from and dialogue with our amazing panel, and who include Jim Gandre, President and CEO of the Manhattan School of Music, Sel Kardan, President and CEO of the Colburn School, and David Stull, president of the San Francisco Conservatory. So we have got just a star panel here. I am so excited. Thank you all for joining us. To get us started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to take about 4 minutes or so and share with us kind of a little background on their institutions and the key work that they're doing related to this aspect of social change. Then I'm going to pose a few questions to them, and then we will open it up to all of you for questions, which you can be submitting throughout our session through the Q&A chat function. And I encourage you to do that. It should be in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So with that, Jim, why don't you kick us off?
Excited to. Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for inviting me to be here today and the rest of us. It's a great honor. In my intro, I'd like to cover quite a bit of ground, so I'll try to be brief about the various subjects, and then we can come back and talk about details perhaps later in the discussion. I've been in this business for about 35 years, and I have been committed to diversity in enrollment and hiring since I started in this work. And I'm proud that we moved the needle at every institution, noticeably at every institution I work. But about 3 years ago, I realized, perhaps a little later than other people did, that we have to move well beyond good work and diversity and really work about inclusion and equity as well. And so as part of our strategic plan at MSM that we were developing 3 years ago, we really put into a significant part of that was inclusion. And when we started talking about that, our own chief of staff, Alexa Smith, who's a Sphinx lead program fellow, stepped up and said, I want to be helping you with that, and I want to be leading that. So as part of our work there, we hired a group called Values Partnership to help us. And the guy who owns Values Partnership was worked with the Obama administration and was in charge of his faith-based programs for the Obama's entire presidency. And the first thing we did was we did this what was called the Gauge survey, and we wanted to survey our students and our faculty and our staff to see how they felt about the landscape of our institution. So we did that, and we got some really interesting feedback, and I can talk about the details of that later in the discussion if we want to. our plan as part of this for 21-20 was to say that we're going to include BIPOC and women composers and creators in every performance that we did. And at that time, we were thinking that was very bold. We also talked about revamping the curriculum, so it would actually be inclusive and not just simply having a course on women composers or a course on African-American composers or something. And then when the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, et cetera, happened, we decided to move much more quickly and move that effort up a year, but to concentrate solely on Black creators. And what we mean by Black Creators Initiative is composers, choreographers, conductors, directors, so that every single performance that we have here, student recitals to the opera to whatever it would be, would include a Black creator of some sort. And so, for instance, for this year, 61 of our composers, or 24% of all the composers on every concert this year, are Black Americans or from the African diaspora. We commissioned a new musical theater work called Le Comte Noir, the Black Count, which is the real, it says the real Count of Monte Cristo. And then we've had already 36 sessions this year for our faculty, alumni, and students on DEI issues, particularly helping our faculty become comfortable and move forward and to be helpful to our students, so that everyone is getting a complete education. You know, Kelly Hall Tompkins, one of our graduates and also a faculty member here who's holds the Sphinx Medal of Excellence. She said she was doing a competition many years ago and she was playing a piece by George Walker, so she decided to go after and meet him. He lived in New Jersey, and he started naming a bunch of Black composers and she didn't know them. And she said later, she said that just yesterday on this faculty forum that we had, she said, you know, he said to me, your education's not complete. And so one of the things that we want to do here as part of our curriculum retooling is to make sure that all of our students have a complete education. And I want to close my intro with just an email I got a week ago from a pre-college conductor, a conductor in our pre-college program. And she said, thank you for bringing issues of equity, diversity. This is a white faculty member. Thank you for bringing issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion and the historical disenfranchisement of Black Americans, both politically and artistically, to the foreground at MSM this year. This mission has inspired significant learning for me personally as I seek to share an awareness and understanding of the incredible musical contributions of the music of the African diaspora with my students in the pre-college. We are currently working on a video recording project performance of the first movement of dedication of Margaret Bond's Montgomery Variations, which was composed in commemoration of the Selma Montgomery March and dedicated to MLK Jr. Those kinds of things are incredible testimonials to the impact we are beginning to see at the institution and the changes that we're making in the lives of our faculty and certainly of our students who we serve. So with that, I'll close and move on to my colleagues.
Awesome. This is just such, you know, I think an incredible example, and even from my perspective, my own personal example as a violinist and as an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan, and literally went into a lesson one day and my teacher said, do you want to play music by Black composers? And I was like, there are no Black classical composers. What are you talking about? And didn't know. And that experience which led me to focus on that repertoire for my undergraduate and graduate recitals was one of the main catalysts that ended up engaging in the founding of Sphinx. So this role, this opportunity for more institutions to have its systemic, I think is really going to be key, and I look forward to conversing about that. So thanks so much for sharing that, Jim. Fantastic. Sal, do you want to take us from there?
Well, such a pleasure to be here as well, Aaron. Thanks for inviting us, and it's great to be here on the screen with two of my dear colleagues, David and Jim. And I think over the last few years, it's just been great to have a sounding board. And I have to give Jim kudos for this, because he realized that the independent conservatories really never talk to each other. So I think it's more than a few years, Jim. It's probably 7 or 8. We have regular discussions and meetings, and in the past year, they've been weekly for a time, and now we moved to monthly. And so I have to say it's so encouraging to see the collective institutional commitment over the last year or two, diversity and inclusion and equity. And it's fascinating to bounce ideas off each other. We're each unique institutions, but nevertheless, it's a great opportunity to learn. I know this topic is devoted to higher education, but I don't think you can have a conversation about higher education without the pipeline that feeds higher education, the students coming into higher education. And I think, all of us on the screen and many of our peer institutions have vibrant pre-collegiate programs as well. In our case at the Colburn School, we're somewhat unique in our equal emphasis, but also our history, that we actually began as a community school. So I think from the very origins of the school back in the 1950s, when it was part of USC as a community school, this idea of removing barriers and access has been key. And as the conservatory developed and Richard Colburn made this transformational philanthropic gift to create it, that model really, I think, was informed by the origins of the community school, which is still a very, very important and vibrant part of our institution. So the fully scholarship model we have in the conservatory, the robust scholarship programs in all of our pre-collegiate programs, including dance, have really been a core mission of the school since the beginning. We had an opportunity about 10 years ago to take a look at all of the programs that had sort of been siloed, developed by the various units of the school, from the community school to the dance program to a music academy that we were developing, and of course our conservatory, and how those units were engaging our community internally, our local community, and nationally, and having a conversation about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we realized there was incredible work being done, but there wasn't a common thread. So I had a terrific opportunity to bring in Nate Zeisler as Director of Community Engagement to take a look institutionally at how we could create a program which reflected our values and really engaged the entire Colburn School community. And over time, that's been, we feel, a tremendous success. And now that program is called the Center for Innovation and Community Impact, and Hasmin Morales is our assistant director. And of course, she's giving a panel right now, I think, at the same time. I can't hear her panel, but I'll tune in and watch it later. And she's been a member of the Sphinx lead cohort, I think, in 2019. So when it came time for us, we've been building a number of programs. And when the events this summer occurred, and it was a moment where we said, let's take a stock of what we're doing, what more we can do, the sense of a renewed commitment, urgency. We had a lot of the pillars in place to implement some of the ideas and programs that came forward. And I think, my personal philosophy is to really empower our staff who are experts in it, our faculty who are passionate about it. And it really went through the entire institution, from our Jumpstart program in our community school, which is a fully scholarship program now, all the way down to early childhood, all the way to our teaching fellows program in the conservatory. And I think the other thing we realized, we aren't experts in everything. There's some things we felt we were very strong in, and the idea of partnership has always been important to me in our institution. And so creating partnerships with those who are experts in the field and who can inform us and help change our culture institutionally became so critical to us. And of course, we're very grateful and excited to partner with Sphinx and look forward to that partnership on a national level, particularly focused on enhancing the pipeline for our music academy program, really, which is the gateway for our conservatory as well as other prestigious conservatories such as Manhattan and San Francisco. And then partnering here locally with the Inner City Youth Orchestra Los Angeles, which is the largest African-American youth orchestra in the country, with Chuck Dickerson's leadership and vision. And immediately we were able to engage our conservatory students as teaching fellows to work with the members of ICOLA. So this was all, the building blocks were in place. And as we looked to enhance it on a sort of an immediate scale, we realized Los Angeles Opera Company was producing The Anonymous Lover by Joseph Bologna. and needed a production venue to do that. And we had a few years ago equipped our campus with 4K cameras robotically, and were able to do it safely in COVID. So of course we wanted to help them with that. We co-produced the opera with them, but also made that a project for our community. So exploring the works of Joseph Bologna at the conservatory level, having discussions with the LA Opera, panel discussions. So there's much work to be done, but we felt like all the investment that we'd made over the years gave us a platform to put a lot of new things into place quickly. Of course, I think my colleagues would agree that independent conservatories have that nimbleness. We've all been able to do things quickly because our small scale, I think the close relationships we have with our community, our faculty, our staff, our boards. And so, there's lots of work to be done, but we feel like we're moving the whole community together, which for me is extremely important, that it isn't just a portion of the community that's invested in this, and that everyone's working together as we develop new ideas. So that's a little brief overview, but looking forward to all these wonderful projects we have ahead.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And again, touching on all of these key points that I just see are so relevant for so many people. Obviously, the pipeline and the role that community schools have played in all of our lives coming up, and especially the collaborations, that kind of looking at the network, the web, the tapestry of what's in a particular community. And I know from the outset, that has been such one of the biggest focuses of Sphinx, as all of you know, right? It's just literally, Sphinx is not an organization, it's a network, there's a web, and that's how the impact happens. And so I definitely look forward to talking more about that. And also potentially it'll be interesting through our conversation if there are things that can be replicated or not replicated when we look at, music schools that are, embedded in broader universities, or what are some of the obstacles or challenges that are or not there in these other circumstances too, since I'm sure that's a number of people in our audience represent organizations like that. So great. David, look forward to your initial thoughts.
Aaron, thank you. First of all, it is an honor to be here. And I do want to echo what Jim and Sel have said. The connection between the conservatories has been something that's been really substantial for us. Jim did get this launched. And Aaron, I want to come back to you, because all of us in these roles, those of us who've been in these jobs 30 and 35 years, having worked at Oberlin and Lawrence before that, Aaron, the contribution you have made and the early on partnerships that began, that created, frankly, momentum that I think has been accelerated now. And it's a chance for us to use really a horrible tragedy within history that has frankly been revealed. It's not anew, but a revealed set of tragedies to, I believe, turn it into a tremendous opportunity for change. And I think from the leadership point of view for the conservatory, what was first is to take exactly that, especially with the board, because I think the key here for us was we began working with our students and our alumni and the former advisory council about exactly how we would want to respond to this and what the opportunities were. And what we did receive back is, while students had what they felt was a great experience, there was no question what was identified as an incomplete education. The fact that Black composers, that within the frame of our concerts, we were not seeing that. And we became really focused on how do we not only change that, but from my point of view, how do we not just make this a reaction in time, but how do you move towards more of a systemic approach? The way to address systemic racism is to move towards systemic inclusion, but that means you have to put resources behind it. I think the fact of the matter is that you have to dedicate financial resources to these activities in the long term. And that, essentially came up with the 5 areas in which we saw key opportunities. One, which everyone's discussed here, is curriculum. And certainly from the standpoint of not just offering courses, but the comprehensive integration of experience across all courses of the curriculum was key. But then we began to look at how do we really support our Black students more effectively, and that came down to scholarships. And so right away with the board, the question is, how do you create an opportunity for a board? That is, you have a chance to invest resources to lead change. And so I said, look, commit to 10 full rides, get behind a $15 million approach here right out of the gate. And we had people step up with $1.5 million in support to kick it off. We've already raised another $800,000 towards a scholarship program. The next thing was establishing, how do we actually begin to alter the destiny of the canon itself? And how do we do that with our Civic Center partners? And that led to a partnership with the Central Coast Symphony, about a 10-year commissioning project. We commission a Black composer every year for 10 years. And I think thinking about decade-long or decades-long initiatives that we commit to now, that we say we're going to do it publicly, means it doesn't allow the institution to veer off course. In other words, if you say you're going to do it and put this on the website and commit resources to it, it means it has to happen. So we actually raise the money in advance from donors to fund the commissions each year over 10 years, going out into the future. The next phase was, how do we then harness this great community we have to think about, yes, we have our role. Yes, we must support our students and alums. Yes, we need to be integrating our curriculum more effectively. But how do we leverage our power on the pipeline side of the entry points, have been discussed by my colleagues here, and the exit points? So here, a couple of years ago, we started a program with the local Baptist church. Reverend Amos Brown had come to me and said, I have great space. I got these kids in the community that do not have access to music lessons. We actually put together a consortium of Temple Emmanuel, the largest synagogue in San Francisco, Third Baptist Church, the District Board of Supervisors, and the Correct Foundation put money into this, and the Yamaha Corporation. We started offering free lessons. Well, it's a choral program, it's a theory program. Kids come for after-school help with homework, and it's in the center of what really is the Black community here in the city, which is unfortunately quite small in San Francisco. And this program became so successful that we said, we can model this and we can start to feed these kids into our pre-college programs. And this became an idea of how do we continue to extend this opportunity all across at least our community so we can have a greater funnel towards kids having opportunities. Well, then we started looking at the back end. So once we have students coming out of the conservatory, how do we transition them out? And we were looking at the New World Symphonies program, which has been, I think, really pushing ahead very well, but we thought, how do we create an opportunity for Black artists to enter the profession? And recently, SFCM acquired Opus 3 Artists, the management company. And in that process, we created a series of apprenticeships. And the idea is to have Opus 3 apprentices so that as people reach that stage of career, it's a chance for them to be moved into management. And we've now coupled that opportunity with this pipeline. So I think, the key here for us was sustainability over not just a year or two, but for decades, resources, making sure that finances, money follows the action and it's committed up front, being sure you had entry and exit programs that were really key and working with your partners, and energizing, as I said, the Civic Center generally, reaching out to the symphony and the opera to say, hey, we can help you. Let us help you with our programs. We need your assistance by experience for students, the opportunity for your brand to be behind this, for your board to be behind it, but we can create the infrastructure to accomplish this. And having spent decades on this, literally in various forms, I suppose I see this as such an inflection point in history because it's our greatest opportunity. And I think for those of us in these roles, if we don't step forth and make sure that we take every advantage to make sure that it sticks, and we've lost something critically important. So I think it, as much as a challenging time, it's a hugely exciting time because of that.
Awesome. Well, this is great and just an incredible swath of information already. I already know there's tons of questions coming in. We will get to as many of them as we can very, very shortly. I just wanted to kind of, I had this initial question because I hear it and I see it so often, and kind of put out whoever wants to pick it up first, and curious dialogue even between you. That there are, oftentimes I encounter, could be faculty or staff or students at a school, and they feel very frustrated. They want something to change. They look at the repertoire of the orchestra. They look at things like what you have just described, but they're not necessarily happening at their institution. What advice would you share for them, for those who are feeling frustrated, who are at an institution and either feel like change is not happening, or it's not happening at any type of pace that they feel will be relevant for a student, for their time at the institution, and even for faculty or staff in any kind of way that they feel is relevant? Can they can they do anything? What would you encourage them to do that could help to bring about that change if these types of initiatives are not happening where they are?
Well, I'd say get started. You probably have more power than you might think. Institutional change, as we know, sometimes comes slow, too slowly, but it is always slower than individual change because it's collective change. But I think, and I've seen students do this, whether it's simply just selecting repertoire that is important or meaningful to you and performing it and of course, with all the technology we have now, sharing it with the world. There's a lot of impact behind that. I mean, I know our students are scouring the internet looking for repertoire ideas, probably on each other's websites looking to see what other schools are doing. I think there's tremendous power. I think there's a great deal of agency in that, and not to discount that. And then beginning to share that in an active way with others. I've seen our students now say, wow, I heard that the other day we had our quartet in residence, the Viano Quartet, performed this gorgeous quartet by Florence Price. And then immediately a community school faculty member emailed me and said, where do I find that? How do I get that, right? I mean, so there's the impact of a quartet for young musicians selecting repertoire, and there's going to be a ripple effect into students that never knew Florence Price, right? So I'm a great believer in get started. Yes, there'll be frustrations. You'll wish others were coming along as fast as you, but I think there's great power in the individual in this case.
Yeah. I love that idea about action, because I think that's just critically important. And it's often kind of a first question that I ask when someone's like, oh, they come, they're like, well, I'm frustrated about this. So the first question is, okay, so what are you already doing that's not working? Okay, you don't like what's not happening, but what have you done to contribute to trying to bring about a solution? And I love that ripple effect. Any additional kind of thoughts, Jim or David, about that?
I think, first of all, I think what Sel said was spot on, but I think you can also go to the conductors or the department chair and take a few of you with you, take a few people with you, maybe not just by yourself. And just say, hey, look what these other institutions are doing. Because a lot of times, frankly, institutions look at other institutions and they don't want to be left behind, or they don't want to. So that's okay to use that as a possibility of getting people to look at this. But I found that most people are pretty open to things when a group of people will come in and sit down and reasonably say, hey, we really want to do this. This is really important to us. And it's not just, and I don't mean this to say that that's not enough, but bringing a diverse group, a Latinx folks and Asian folks and white folks and Black folks all together going in saying they want this, it's going to be, I think, received primarily well. I think Sel sort of alluded to this earlier. Those of us in independent conservatories, we don't have the same models of faculty, both in the way we hire them, the governance structures, et cetera, are different. And so I think things can come from the top far more easily than, for instance, it would have been for you when you were dean, probably at Michigan, where it's a very different kind of thing, or Indiana or Rice or a whole host of institutions. And it's just a difference. It's not better or worse. It's just in this case, it allows us to be a little bit more nimble and move more quickly than other institutions would.
Awesome. No, that's definitely very much the case. David, did you have any?
Yeah, I would simply say, look, concrete opportunities for change. I think, first of all, I'm going to just echo Jim's comments about bringing a group together. We did not, SFCM did not come out of the gate, I would say, with a perfect response. We were really trying to get the board on board and writing language. And our students and alumni came to us and said, hey, you guys are not doing a good enough job. You're starting here, but you have not gone fast enough. And these are the mistakes you're making. And this is why. And first of all, for one thing, I was wildly impressed because they came directly to me and said, this is a challenge as a group. And here are the things that we would like to say. First of all, you do need someone who's in the position to simply stand back and say, bring it on, because it has to come in. People just have to welcome it in. And my job is to make sure that it gets support, period. My job is to get anyone else who has concerns on board. And frankly, that wasn't that difficult when it was translated into opportunity and not challenge. Translating it from, guys, stop. there's a huge opportunity here to do good. Stop. This is a great opportunity to not only create a better school, but a much more interesting curriculum and a fantastic concert series and a wonderful opportunity to give support to our alumni, not just our Black alumni and our students, but everyone. This is a huge opportunity. So I think concrete, productive, key solutions of these are the ways in which you can change, which are going to be meaningful and lead to more changes is one. Work as as Jim pointed out, bring that community together and give that person in a leadership role the opportunity to do the right thing. Give them a chance to step in and do the right thing, which is get behind it, build the consortium support. But I think most importantly, I'm going to come back, I hate to beat a drum on this, build the resources, put the financial resources behind the ideas. Because let me say, I'm just going to come out. Everyone, follow the money. You put the money behind actions, they will happen. But that's where I think the dividing line can be sometimes between rhetoric at one level and action on the other. So, those are the key things I would say.
Awesome. So I have tons more questions for all of you, but we have a ton of audience questions. So I want to make sure we start getting to them. So one question, this is very interesting. They're relating this to the concerns about academic freedom. And they're asking, how do you address the concerns of academic freedom being infringed upon when diversifying the curriculum and programming? So if you've got, someone say who's, in the, who's the conductor, and they're like, here's, the music I want to play, and that just so happens to not include any Black composers, right? How do you institutionalize this type of social change and balance that with academic freedom? And this person is a student leader, and they share that this is the #1 pushback that they've been getting at their university.
I think it's the freedom to be included, right? Freedom is when you're included. Freedom means freedom for everyone. And that means that as schools, we have an obligation beyond our own individual sense of artistic curation. We all may have interests about music, and of course we do, but our role as teachers and as institutions has to be one where our entire community is welcome and sees themselves in the institution. And that's where real freedom exists. It's not about legislating what you can't say. It's about saying, folks, this hasn't been said enough. And by the way, it's been a very quiet voice in our canon for too long. So bringing all the voices to the table for a conjoined expression of freedom is what's really happening. And I don't think that should be seen as in any way diminishing someone else's freedom.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sel.
No, Jim, go ahead.
With the academic freedom, the thing I think that's it depends on, so let me just be somewhat academic about this answer. It depends on what academic freedom is defined at each university. And sometimes that is, in the faculty handbook, it's defined very differently. So part of this is it's a difficult one-size-fits-all question because of that very thing. So in some cases, academic freedom is really, in some institutions, very narrowly shaped, and it's individual professors can do that. Sometimes it's the legal definition of academic freedom is what you get to do outside of the classroom. And so it's not actually what you get to do inside the classroom. A lot of professors believe that's actually the legal definition. It's not. And my doctorate's in higher education administration. That's part of why I studied a whole law and education course during that time. But I think a lot of institutions will have departmental and or school-wide policies so that if the faculty together votes that this is important, an individual faculty member cannot thwart the will of the entire faculty. So it just depends on what each institution is, how it's set up, to see how strict that can be.
Yeah. Well, I'd say on a very specific, related to orchestra. I always, the orchestra really is the school's ensemble. It's the students' ensemble. And yes, in many cases, there's a permanent music director and they have a lot of say into how that program's created. But remember, that reflects countless numbers of studios across the institution. So all of the faculty have vested interest in what goes on in that orchestra. I'll also say, and I think all of our institutions, because of our scale, relationships matter so much, right? Reaching out to that individual, having a conversation, say, well, let's talk about this. Here's what I've heard from the students. Because I think, what I try to remind myself, and I know my colleagues do every day, is we are all here solely because there is a student body. That is the reason our institutions exist, right? And as administrators, we support our students and our faculty's ability to support our students. So, that for me, the relationship piece, get out of the office, walk down the hall and have that conversation. And 99% of the time it ends in a very positive fashion. So,
yeah. Awesome. So we've got another question. This is a very direct question, which is very simple. So whoever would like to take it on first, and also keep in mind, not everyone has to answer every question that we do. We can kind of hop around a little bit. But the question is very specific. How many of you have Black folks in senior leadership reporting directly to the president? So obviously this is a really important issue. A lot of times, people look and say, oh, okay, an institution's dedicated here or there, but who are in various leadership roles with that direct dialogue with the president of an institution? So if you could kind of, maybe I'll expand a little bit to say in your particular case, and or how do you think about that in terms of having people, who represent various communities in these senior positions?
I have two out of the 12 people on the President's Council, 6 of them report to me, and 2 are Black folks. The Chief of Staff here, who's also our Assistant Vice President for Special Initiatives. And also I just recently hired a new Chief Financial Officer with whom I worked at my last institution. So we had a great relationship there. And she moved from Chicago to New York to join us here, actually 3 weeks ago today. So.
Awesome. And David or Sal, and also with that, if you want to also tackle imagine someone's talking with someone and they're at their institution and they're basically saying, yes, it's nice, we want to be diverse and all that. I hire whatever candidate is best for the position. In our case, it so happens that nobody of color has been filled in those roles. Why are you coming at me, right? What do you say to someone who's kind of bringing that perspective to a conversation like this? And also, again, feel free to share on your own institution.
Yeah, well, I can say we don't. We don't currently have any on our senior leadership council or senior leadership team. And what I would say to that question, and also related to my answer, is that I think it's also part of our process as we talk about developing musicians. I think everybody on this screen is a musician first and then became an administrator, right? So it's also about developing future administrators. I was having a conversation last night with Wu Han, director of Chamber Music Society at Lincoln Center, and of their Chamber Music Society players, 12 also have administrative positions. So we can see that these portfolio careers. And so I think what's incumbent on us as an institution, as we diversify every layer of the institution, is also developing administrative leaders. And aspects like the Sphinx cohort, which we're hosting for the first time this fall, are just so critical of that. And so I think it's just another area that institutions need to invest in.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Aaron, we're about to have one. We haven't announced the appointment publicly yet, but it's done, and you'll see that in about a month out of 5, ostensibly, in the conservatory. I would say that in answer to the second part of your question, when people say, we hire the best person, the reality is there's an obligation on all of us to make sure we build those pools extensively, to make sure that there are candidates of color and that we're looking carefully at every single opportunity to incorporate it in the institution. So there has to be a directed effort behind it. There's just no other way to get it done. It's just that simple. So that would be my comment about how we do it. I think there are fantastic partner organizations to work with. There are tremendous resources that are available. If you just really are willing to do it, you can have a lot of help in securing fellow team members who can bring that voice to the table.
Awesome, awesome. And I should just share for everyone, of course, as well, Sphinx understands and realizes that this is a significant challenge in the field, and hence Sphinx developed some years ago its lead program specifically related to developing administrative talent and career pathways, in addition to obviously performance ones that we've done since the outset. So great questions. This is a question that directly relates to the panelists have experienced some public pressure to remove faculty members who exhibit racist behavior. The tenure process seems to prohibit strong actions. How do you navigate these types of barriers to promote racial equity? So what about that piece when there's public pressure and or you have some potential bad actors on faculty, balancing that? How do each of you approach that?
Well, I'll say, and I don't know if I'm speaking for my colleagues, we do not, and most independent conservatories do not have a traditional tenure process. We do have, contracted faculty, but not in a tenure sense. So it's a very different process for us. And of course, really there's simply a zero tolerance policy. Any behavior of that kind runs counter to the mission of the institution, the core values of the institution. And so I think it's a simpler process. I think it's a much more complex question in a more complex administrative hierarchy and a faculty hierarchy in large institutions. But I'll allow my colleagues who have been at larger institutions comment on that.
Yeah, I would say again, in the independent conservatories, tenure is not part of this space, and therefore I think it allows the institution to respond decisively. And the real question there is navigating that process fairly to everyone involved. It is not an easy thing to do, but it is something that must be done to respond to those issues. This has also emerged conservatories, frankly, around sexual harassment over so many years. These issues have been manifesting themselves, and they are the side of higher education broadly, in fact, all institutions, that America has to come to terms with. I think in both these instances, processes have been put in place. I will say, having served at an institution that did have a very robust tenure system, that was Oberlin, it makes it more difficult. I don't think we should mislead anybody on that from a leadership point of view. There are legal issues that materialize, and it becomes a serious question. But the fact is, the institution must, as it did, as institutions have around sexual harassment in particular and abuse, bring these things into the light. There is just simply no alternative. It must happen at all fronts. And that comes from leadership. It means that the boards have to say this is something we're going to do, and the president and the dean and leadership team has to be on board, because that's where you start to get change out of the institution. So, I mean, I think that's how it has to be redressed. But I would like to parallel, I don't want us to sugarcoat it. There's a big difference between being an independent conservatory and a university-based tenure system. I think that that's something that is just a truth, and it's there.
Yeah. Jim, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree with my colleagues, and it's having worked at a university where there was a tenure system, it is much different than our institutions. One has to be, I think students and sometimes people on the outside want us to move more fast, more quickly than we can sometimes. And I think, we do have to give someone due process and make sure that we are not going against that as well, because that's also not fair. But I think if you have good, robust due processes, you can then handle these things and do the right thing.
Yeah. And is there, just to kind of touch on, and if you could kind of respond both from the independent conservatory perspective, but also from the broader public institutions and broader university structures, which just gets to the institutionalizing piece of our panel. Right? Typically people and often leadership move, right? And so whether it's 5 years or even 3 years, whatever it might be, and often this DEI or social change work is in the structure of initiatives or various things that are relatively easily changed with a change of leadership. Any thoughts about either the things that people who are watching can do or hold their institutions accountable in terms of how they structure this social change work so that it is in fact institutionalized and isn't just a project of the current leader and who knows what will happen when they move on?
Yeah, I think there are two things that we're doing right now that I think are really helpful and that will institutionalize this. One is changing the curriculum so that that has inclusion throughout the curriculum. And that will mean moving things around and maybe teaching a little bit less of something and more of something else. And that's okay. And frankly, that's been done time and time again over the years. We are not studying the same thing now that we did 100 years ago, although there's more of that perhaps than there maybe even should be, besides this issue. And then secondarily is with repertoire. If it just becomes part of the DNA of the institution to do this kind of repertoire work and to have a broad, inclusive repertoire, it'll become part of the DNA, and it'll have to be a conscious effort to take it out, as opposed to initiatives which have a 1 year, 2 year time span. They're funded by some foundation, and then they just go away when the foundation goes away. To me, foundation money or money from individuals should be seed money to do something that's ongoing and not for a particular point in time.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to try and get to a few more questions here as we begin to run short on time. And whoever might want to take this one on, I am a conservatory student, and I feel that my education left me totally unprepared for the current moment. How are you training classical musicians to be artists who can respond to current events?
Well, I'll take that. As I said, sort of in my opening remarks, we've really tried to embed it in every area of our institution. And the teaching aspect, the community engagement aspect are significant parts of our conservatory curriculum. Coupled with that, I think, is a commitment to our students after graduation. And the Center for Innovation and Community Impact is open to alumni from all areas of the school, and we host gatherings and bring them back. So I think, I would say to the questionnaire is, does your institution have that resource? Can you come back? Are there things that the institution has learned that might not have been available to you as a student? Because we try to engage our alumni in that way. We've tried to, around the topics we're discussing today, bring back alumni from years ago who've had significant careers and talk about their experience and what they've seen in the field as artists of color. So I don't think it ends with the 4-year degree or the 2-year degree. It's incumbent on institutions to continue to engage students and prospective students, current students, and alumni. David, I don't know.
I agree, Sel. I think the reality is that I would actually attach this to the previous question about faculty and how we respond. One of the things we haven't mentioned is that I know this has happened certainly in Manhattan and I believe Colburn as well, is we've changed completely, of course, orientation and training of faculty. All of us went through processes of dealing with sexual harassment and assault, and now most definitely diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of the training regimen. All faculty are being taken through, and staff comprehensively across the board. On the student side, we're beginning those things, but the fact that a conservatory student would say, I feel unprepared, is not surprising to me at all. I think that that's absolutely true. These things now are present in the curriculum, and there are opportunities now to engage that certainly within our curriculum. And then during winter term here, which is a project month of January, students have the chance to lead and participate in projects that address these issues. There's an opportunity to really get involved in a deeper way if you wish to. What I'm going to say is, I would say to any student this obligation is not inherent in all of us as members of communities, as part of an institution. It's also inherent in us individually. We have no excuse not to individually educate ourselves on what we can and must do. And that shouldn't feel like a burden. It should feel like a tremendous learning opportunity. The key is to seek the resources in your institution. If they don't have them, insist they be provided. And that it's a chance to do that again. I'm going to bring it back to the productive opportunity. It's a productive opportunity to get your school to respond. And by the way, if you're an SFCM student, yes, we're here to have that.
I just wanted to add one real quick thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Jim and I were talking about this recently. We have to remember that all of our institutions are international institutions. In some cases, 50% of the student body may be international. And I think we need to think carefully and intentionally about how those students need to understand the relevance, the topics, the history. We've heard that from our international student body. I want to participate. I just don't have an understanding. And so I think we may need to tailor some of that as we find students coming from overseas into our institutions.
And Sel, I think that's such an important point to amplify. You know, these are such international institutions that the internal culture now, the conservatory, you know, you're hearing as much Mandarin being spoken in the halls as anything else, to be perfectly candid. And we have to look realistically at what is happening on the ground in the student experience. But Sel, to your point and Jim's point, international students are as curious, more so. And I do think this is a chance for what I describe as horizontal learning, meaning students teaching students, bringing students along on these issues. Because believe me, there are plenty of students in mainland China that have issues they share about their experience growing up in a communist state that limits freedom by design. So there are ways in which this creates a resonance between students about some shared experiences, which would be really helpful. But the institution we have to continue to do all that we can do to facilitate those conversations for learning between those students, among those students in the community generally.
So I have a question that directly relates to David. Earlier, you mentioned about resources and the importance of resources. And we all know you can't do any kind of systemic institutionalizing of any issues without money. And so they've got a money related question. As a student of a private institution, how would you recommend we further DEI initiatives to an administration that wants to see change, but is constantly worried about the opinions of white conservative donors? So in terms of that question, and David, you could kind of tackle that first, but love to hear from you, Sal, and Jim, of course. But not only directly to their question, but what of that? We all know, we've all experienced donors who may not be down for the cause with certain change, and yet represent an outsized percentage of financial impact for our institution. How do you balance that? How do you go about it? What would you say to all of our peers out there digitally who are hoping to have a clear answer to that?
Yeah, well, listen, that's a critical question. And I think, again, backing away from it would be a mistake because it's real. The issue, though, is how a conservative donor, I mean, it depends on, when we say conservative, what does that mean for the donor? I would not lump everybody into a category. This is a challenge we start to get into, how we start to harden up the identity we have of somebody because of what we might have seen one action means they're going to feel another way about a different action. And what I mean by that is most donors, the educational institutions and institutions support music, even if they're conservative, hold value systems actually that believe in what we're trying to achieve. But the way in which it's happening to them feels like it's not on a level platform. And what I'm saying there is essentially the president's job or the dean's job is to educate those donors on the ways in which there are constructive opportunities to lead change and to be excited about it. That, you know, you have an opportunity to make a change here, and actually this change is productive in all of these ways. Is there a risk you can lose the donor? Yes. Could you end up having somebody pull major resources out of an institution? Yes. Donors are not obligated to give us money. I just, you can say, hey, this is the right thing for us to do, but if they don't feel that it is, they can take their resources elsewhere. And so it's not that it's an indelicate conversation, but I think it's a mistake not to have the conversation because they're watching the institution as much as anybody else. And so the key is to get in front of it. You have to get in front of it with the donors, and you have to educate them on what really this is about. And one of the most, we didn't have, fortunately, our board is so tremendously supportive. We didn't have much of this. We had some concern in various quarters. And the thing that one person really responded to, I said, listen, our students came forward saying they loved their education, had a great experience here, but they were just so sad not to see Black composers more often in their experience. I said, how can we not suggest that when we are deleting things from the curriculum that we're better for it?
Right. Yeah.
And, I never thought of it that way. And I said, and how does it feel then? Imagine, if you never, were able to see in your school things that represented who you are. So how would you feel? And I said, this is where it comes from. People who love their alma mater, but just want to be more proud of it than they are now.
Totally. Totally. Awesome. And just for everyone,
you have to invest the time
Yep.
and have the respect to go to that donor and see where they can go to be productive, positive, and see the best of who they are and stay focused on that, to move them in, to get them included. And that's the hard work of leadership, folks.
Totally. Totally.
It's not easy.
And unfortunately, now we're down to less than 5 minutes. But Jim, any quick thoughts on this issue? And then Sel, I'll toss it over to you. And of course, we're swamped with questions here too. So maybe I can hopefully get one more in.
Well, really quickly, I'm fortunate enough not to have that problem. So, good for me. But lots of institutions are not, do have that problem. And it depends, I think, whether it's a public institution has boards, for instance, who are appointed by governors who might be particularly conservative and have particular views on this issue, or particularly conservative institutions, which might have a significant board that feels like this, or donors that do. But I think by and large, David said was that educational institutions tend to have people who are less like that than, for instance, perhaps symphony orchestras or opera companies do. So we're a little bit luckier in general than other institutions are.
Awesome.
I think it's really rallying around board members' commitment and desire to see the optimal learning environment and optimal working environment. And we all know that that's a diverse and inclusive environment. The greatest learning takes place in diverse and inclusive and equitable situations. So, just continuing to educate. And I think that goes back to an earlier comment a number of us were saying, is bringing your entire community along. Don't leave the volunteer leadership behind. That may be the board, it may be a committee, it may be a volunteer. Everyone is part of your community. And so education for the entire community and moving as an institution, that's what institutionalizes it. Back to your earlier question. If it's living in the office of the president or the office of the dean, and then it's not institutionalized. It has to live with all of your constituents.
Yeah. So, and maybe to follow up on this, and we've just got about 2 minutes. So anyone who wants to answer and kind of quickly, but this does relate to that financing, not necessarily from donors, but in your actual budgets. A host of leaders from communities of color and others in our field have called for specific budgetary thresholds, i.e., for example, 10% of budget should be dedicated to DE&I. And I think for two reasons. One, to actually have resources dedicated, as you were mentioning, David, but also so that institutions will actually begin to track, because many don't, how much they are actually investing. Just for each of you, do you support that viewpoint? And if so, do you either already follow it or are you exploring it?
Yeah. Well, I'll just jump in really quickly and say, I support the viewpoint in the sense that you definitely need to have dedicated resources. And then I would go so far as to say this, but there's a little bit of a catch, and I'm going to give this to you from a leadership point of view. If you just say, we're going to have a percentage of resources to do DEI and that funnels it, it allows everybody else to say, oh, okay, well, that's done in that 10% over there. And you have to be cautious about both building resources, but saying, folks, this is a platform all the way across the curriculum. We all have responsibility here. So, even if this is a music history 101 course and, this instructor is white, guess what? That doesn't mean that, oh, that's handled the 10% allocation over there that we made. So I think it's a both and. Aaron, you need to have, I think, dedicated resources that are doing very specific things. I think the key there is for it to have multi-year, many-year components. To Jim's point, to be sure, though, it's not just a one-off, but that you're actually putting things in that are very hard to veer away from in the future. And the second part is saying, guys, these are the resources here, but everyone working here has this obligation. So I do think specific dollar commitments are important, but to be cautious about not saying this pays for that and the other 90% is for business as usual. That's all I would suggest.
Couldn't agree more, David. I think that the concern about any specific percentage is that an institution stops there or even finds a way to just justify that particular percentage. And, I think all of us, the more we institutionalize it, it's going to be embedded in every aspect of governance, of executive leadership, administration, faculty, students, staff. So the resources flow, and they may be significantly higher than that. So that's
awesome. In our last 30 seconds, Jim, any closing thoughts? You get the final word.
Wow. Well, I have been so inspired by the last 2 years of work here, and then the MSM, but also the last year of watching educational institutions like FSCM and Colburn and others take real steps that we should have taken long ago. But the fact is, we are taking them. We are institutionalizing them, and the effects yesterday, again on that forum that we had with our faculty, and how they were being vulnerable, and they were talking about the things they didn't know and that they really wanted help with. That is not something that would have happened a year or two ago. It just wouldn't have happened. And I think the confluence of all the things that have happened in our society, and the tragedy of 400 years that led up to this sort of new reckoning, which shouldn't have had, obviously had taken this long, but it has been really beautiful to me to watch that happen and what that does for our students, because ultimately that's what we're here for, is our students. So I'm so happy that all of us are on this journey, and I'm also happy that other people are, and I'm just really glad and hopeful to see where it leads us.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I think we had about 100 unanswered questions, but lets you know how important this topic is. This has been an extraordinary conversation with our panelists. So I want to thank Jim Gandre, Sel Kardan, and David Stull. Thank you for sharing your time, talent, and expertise with all of us. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.